me introduce the directors, John Kaufman and Elle Sawyer, Rebecca Vaudrey, music therapist, Creative Forces, Bill O'Brien, who was the Creative Forces project director, Yoka Bratt, Drexel research partner, Creative Forces, and I'm the real research expert on pain. So, this is, it's so powerful in the sense that, and this is the second time I watched it, and it's even more powerful than the first time. And especially after today, we had so many fabulous panels today that helped us kind of go deeper into all of the issues and all of the potential for arts therapies. So first of all, how did you come up with Deborah, Lito, and Ben? How did you discover and decide to focus on these particular veterans?
Hello, test. Just first and foremost, thank you all so much. Thank you, Renee. Thank you to our executive producer, Rob Barrow, and Paula Katz, Joel Breitkoff, and all the other producers are here. As we all know, it takes so much effort and it takes a village to make things like this happen. So
6 years, you said. Yeah, that's incredible.
And our producer, Gabe Weiner, as well. So thank you all so much, sincerely, first and foremost, and to the Sound Health Network. But it's a journey, like you said, right? It's a long journey. And we connected with Deborah originally at the Music Conservatory of Westchester in the Healing Our Heroes program that Joel started probably 10 years ago or so at this point. And that journey, we knew that we wanted to have a story kind of based there, but also to connect the dots across the country and then eventually across the world. And we connected with Dr. Bratt probably early in the process. She connected us with Rebecca. Rebecca connected us with Lito and Ben. And that's basically the journey we followed. So we followed our natural curiosity and really wanted to humanize the veterans and also the music therapists first and foremost.
So you decided early on that you were going to focus on these particular people. It's so extraordinary. Rebecca, we met with Captain Luis Avila some years ago. There was a shot of us. It was a Memorial Day concert. And I began to kind of have a little bit of a comprehension of what it takes to rehabilitate someone who's been so severely injured. And Creative Forces is an extraordinary program. So we'll touch on all of these subjects. But Rebecca, I had never really thought about somebody like Lito, who was actually affected and had PTSD, but was one of your colleagues and suddenly said, "Hey, I need help too." I mean, that's extraordinary. What a gift for you to be able to work with him. Talk a little bit about your work. Period. I mean, let's roll it back. What is music therapy? I mean, how many of you are in the field and really understand what this film is about from a music therapy? So really not that many of you. So please tell us what music therapy is. I mean, it began in the 19th century, but it really began in this country in response to, again, veterans in World Wars I and II. Can you tell us about that history?
Great, thanks. Awesome question, especially so relevant to this film that you all just watched and experienced, the journey of three people who had music in some way in their lives to help them through experiences. And I think that is the biggest thing when we work as music therapists and creative arts therapists. I have art and dance movement therapy colleagues in the crowd with me. And so our mechanisms of art, whether it's music, art or dance movement, we use these in a way to help rehabilitate both non-musical goals, really using our arts as a form and a mechanism for recovery, for rehabilitation, and for healing. And you saw not just of the patients, but also people we work with who might be experiencing it that can lead them to different paths, and families. As Deborah said, for every person, for every service member we work with in veteran, there's a family there. And so it really does help holistically to heal.
And the actual, so no actual music therapy was shown because of HIPAA. So give an example of what a music therapy intervention is and how it differs from just enabling people to play music and have that sense of community.
Sure, and what you saw, I mean, these are like kind of mock experiences. So active music making is definitely an intervention, improvisation, songwriting, which you saw, lyric analysis. So you just did such a beautiful job of being able to capture a lot of the interventions that we use musically in a non-clinical context. So it really comes down to the goals. So when we're treating it in the setting of we're working on non-musical goals, that is the therapy component of it. So the session is whatever the patient needs and adapting our arts forms to be able to meet those needs and reach those goals.
And as you said, it takes years sometimes. When you said that Ben came and had already 2 years of rehabilitation, and that was just the beginning. So, and his mother, I mean, I want that mother. I mean, what an amazing...
Everyone wants Lisa for
yeah, such devotion. And what happens to veterans who get out of after severe injuries who don't have that support?
Well, I think with Ben, I mean, it took 2 years to even get him to be able to engage in having that kind of treatment because he had such severe trauma and such catastrophic brain injury that he had averse reactions to any sounds. So even to get his tolerance level ready to receive something like music therapy, that then you kind of start the healing trajectory and the journey once he was able to engage in that way. I think for active duty, we work in different military treatment facilities, but when they get out, then there are creative arts therapists in the VA as well. And so you can really work from both sides, not just active duty recovery, but veterans as well.
Also the huge bag of medications too. So, and Deborah alluded to the fact that she was still on pain meds and trying to get off of them a little bit, but kind of replacing medications, or not replacing them, but kind of adding arts therapies to medications can probably be helpful in the sense of reducing the amount of medication they need, right?
I think the biggest one we saw, I mean, Lisa said, these are the pills that if Ben doesn't take, he will die. Medication is necessary to keep people alive, to replace hormones that have been lost. His pituitary gland was gone. So there's a lot of neurochemical changes when you are missing parts of your brain, when you lose parts of your brain. So there's medications that are absolutely critical. But something I noticed, I don't know if anyone picked up on that, was the amount of antidepressants that he needed was significantly reduced. And that's because, as Julie alluded to, when you're engaged in music and in the arts, it helps to create levels of dopamine and that feel-good hormone. And so he was able to reduce the amount of antidepressants he was on, she said, to almost nothing.
So we heard about dopamine, and we heard a lot about all of these chemicals that are produced in the brain. Please tell us what they are and why they're important. We read about them all the time too. So somebody kind of spell that out for us. Why do we need these? Why are these chemicals helpful?
Well, I think it's all about a balance. And so when we have, for example, with PTSD, you might have activated the amygdala, the limbic system, which will produce chemicals. And I'm not a neuroscientist here, so I think GABA is one of them. Dr. Lim, am I on the right path here? So that part of the brain that's activated, that's hypervigilant and hyperaroused, will produce an increase in some of those. And so we need to have also the feel-good hormones to balance that. I'll defer to Dr. Brott, if you would like a more in-depth analysis.
I am going to ask about hypervigilance, because this is something that gets triggered, and trigger is another word that came up. But let me go on to Bill and tell us what Creative Forces is, what it does, and you were, I think, one of the founders of it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the most extraordinary organization. I had the real privilege of touring Walter Reed and seeing exactly what Creative Forces does, and this is an arm of the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts.
Yeah, and I do need to make a quick disclaimer that it can be confusing, because there certainly are people involved with Creative Forces, like Rebecca. She's our lead music therapist. Other people who have been affiliated with us in some way. The film itself is not directly about Creative Forces, and we didn't fund it, and my being here does not...
No, I understand.
I'm not allowed to endorse the film.
This is something the NEA has to say, by the way,
yes,
so he's not saying that as a negative about the film.
But, I can endorse this music therapist, absolutely, and that researcher. They're both extraordinary. So Creative Forces is an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts, and it's in partnership with the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs, and it started 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. It started at Walter Reed. They had been pulling together a really intriguing and ambitious looking response to a vexing medical issue for the, you think 2011 really is when we started talking. PTSD is discussed now in a way that's very different than then. It was very stigmatized, still is, certainly to some extent, but we were very interested at that time. We had been co-convening a number of summits with the National Science Foundation on intersections of arts and science, intersections of arts and health. And so basically we started at Walter Reed. We were doing some writing programs that we had already been doing with veterans, and we were kind of working with, I think I saw Melissa Walker was the art therapist initially at NICO that already had an art therapy program. But we were as interested as the military was to advance our understanding of what the value and the impact of the arts could be to respond to these specific issues, and that is TBI and associated psychological health issues, which is PTSD and other related things. So it's grown now to, it started at Walter Reed. We did kind of a test of how we could take an intern of Melissa's, embed her at Fort Belvoir, which has a similar, there's an Intrepid Spirit network of facilities that were stood up to specifically to address these issues. And it's spread now to 8 DoD and 4 VA hospitals. And that's really enabled us to, as Dr. Captain retired Sarah Cass, who's now our military medical advisor, and who was the director of the NICO when we started. When she retired, she joined us, which was a real great day for us. And I just want to call out also, there's other people here who are very deeply involved in supporting the Creative Forces efforts. Our Office of Research and Analysis, I think I saw Sunil here, and Patricia. We are very dedicated to advancing evaluation and research on this. And then we've got some partners from the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. I think Stephen and Catherine are here. And they are actually the employers and supervisors that are helping to provide administrative support. So really strong partners. It's really been interesting, and I'm going to have to navigate on how this doesn't sound like an endorsement, so don't take any of this as an endorsement, please. But it's been really interesting to hear these conversations last night and today, hearing and seeing so many kind of echoed, last night, Indra, am I saying your name right? Yeah, I think last night you said this notion of being a part of something bigger than yourself, that comes up every day, it seems like, in what we're doing. And today, the NIH conversation was really interesting, and just in terms of how much of a heavy lift it is to get to the science of all of this. Because we've been spending 10 years, we've published 22 publications, and we're scratching the surface. It's not reached the threshold of any gold standards yet, but we're honing in on clinical control trials that we should be starting next year. But that's only after conducting a lot of preliminary. We've got 4 feasibility studies right now. But the one thing that I think, concluding with something like this, I think we could instantly see what we're publishing as our key findings, that these kind of interventions can help support emotional regulation, a better understanding of PTSD themes, building social connection, ultimately, the ability to experience hope and gratification. I mean, that was all over that film.
Oh yeah, Ben talked about really seeing me content.
Ben, exactly.
Amazing, yeah.
I've got such a blessed life,
And Lito, I'm curious about this. Lito said fear was kind of a huge driving force for me. Fear of feeling,
right.
Fear of experiencing the trauma or the re-traumatization, as he would have experienced it. What is different about veterans today as opposed to after, say, World War II?
Oh man.
Medicine
well, I think,
is
advanced. After World War II, my dad fought in Korea, and then you look at Vietnam, and then you look at these wars. I think each one of them was so different in terms of how the rest of us felt connected or not. to what was happening. And I think World War II, the Greatest Generation, they came back ticker taped parades. I think, that was one thing. My dad fought in Korea, which I think when he came back, it was a little bit of a meh from the, not so many parades, et cetera. I think these more recent wars, I think we're in some ways in a really great moment when you think about how our broader society recognizes all of our responsibility to be a part of the aftermath of this. I think there's a heightened awareness of that now.
Definitely. And medicine has come so far that men are coming home who would not have come home. In those earlier wars.
That's
and
right.
So the long rehabilitation, the treatments are far more complex. And there's no question that an appreciation of the service is, I see it now. I was in the airport the other day and Vietnam vets got off the plane and the entire airport stood up and applauded them. So it's definitely better in that respect.
I do want to, if I could, I just want to get to the endorsement that's not an endorsement. What was so great about being able to sit in front of an artistic, a well-constructed artistic, do not use that as a pull quote, piece that really allowed you to engage in this is that it instantly rang true. And in some ways, the gold standard of science isn't always in a really easy position to confirm or deny the truth of what's happening. And in some ways, those findings that I listed were validated by what I just saw here. So you kind of flip the script on how art can also help us understand and see and feel what the truth is on some of this.
Art changes hearts and minds. Yep. Artists change hearts and minds, which is why this marriage is important. Thank you. Thank you.
May I add one thing
yeah,
to
of course.
Bill's comment about the advancement, the differences between now also for what you said, when the men and women are coming home now, there's also a better understanding over the generations of what PTSD is and what is happening. So what we knew as combat fatigue or shell shock in World War II.
Soldier's heart.
Right. Now we understand what it is, and it's not just, isolation, or it's not just a feeling. It's something neurochemically happening, and it's impacting your whole physiology. And so that advancement has been huge, the understanding and awareness.
And it's very hard to come to heal. The healing process is really challenging. And I would say, so back to the filmmaking. So first of all, what we're trying to change hearts and minds about is the power of music therapy and music interventions to deal with these types of intractable problems. So I assume you learned a great deal in making this movie. Were you already interested in this subject before? How did you get pulled into the project?
I think pulled in is about right. Ms. Renée, thank you so much for your support of this film, and Bill, for your endorsement. I'll take it however it comes. And again, thank Rod and everybody who was involved in making the film, and Gabe and Chris here, along with John. And anyway, so just let me say really quick, as I'm watching the film, it's a different experience watching it here in front of everybody. And I'm right now super emotional and been sitting here super emotional. This is a very dear piece to us. Rebecca has poured so much into this as well with us and everybody, and we've involved in this. No, and to answer your question, no, we're not therapists at all, and we're not veterans or service folks on no level. That way. But what we are is we're artists, and we, approach things in topics and this work from a very human perspective. And we know that we don't know, so we involve folks that do. And again, we met with Dr. Yoke. Dr. Yoke plugged us in with trusted folks, and we have been pulling along, Rebecca and Julie and Tina is here, and a number of other amazing therapists that step by step was right there with us. I mean, for interviews after interview, that we would check in with them. I just pride us, on that process of making sure that we checked, even if it took a little longer, which, and looking at Rod, our producer, and thank you for your patience with this process, but we recognized that this was beyond us, and it is more than what we knew or have ever been involved in. We respected that. And I feel like, and through that, and engaging in and with the you know, the veterans that took part and their families. I feel like, you know, as I'm sitting here watching it and everybody watching it with us, I really felt that connection, and I felt like people got what we've been trying to say all along with this film.
Absolutely. And I want to say, too, you created 3 whole people that we cared about, that we rooted for. Deborah has such wisdom. Didn't she just anchored the film for me, and you could see why her children would be so angry that she was changed by, of course, her experience with 9/11, but then also in the service. And for her to be struggling with that and yet somehow maintain a kind of a faith, and to take charge, of course, in that confrontation in the therapy session was also fascinating to see. So thank you for showing us real people who were all dealing with a tragedy in each case. Yoka is really one of the only researchers on a high level studying pain, chronic pain. And I'm wondering, what has been your experience with veterans? You've done some work with veterans.
I've actually not worked directly, clinically with veterans, but been doing research with Rebecca to be able to look at what are the effects of, in our case, music therapy on their lives. And one very interesting project we did together was a secondary analysis or a post hoc analysis of songs that were written by these service members that Rebecca worked with. So you witness one, you know, a few songs here, but we took all the lyrics of the songs and started analyzing them for themes. And a lot of the themes that we found in these songs were actually represented here in this documentary. Being able, you know, that fear for expression of emotion, being able to, you know, being given a different forum to express your emotions, and how that is possible in a safe way through the structure that music can provide. Being able, this was for me a very emotional moment when we discovered the theme that they offered for the very first time, shared some of their deepest emotions and worries with family or friends. So they hadn't been able to share some of these deeply troubling things with their family. And for the first time, through songwriting and then performing the song for the family, they were able to do that. So that allowed them to feel not only connected with their loved ones and maybe repairing some of the relationships or start rebuilding some of the damage that their PTSD or other psychological health problems that they came back with from their deployments, that they were able to start repairing that in their relationships, but also the wider community feeling connected. And Rebecca talks a lot about this, and we talked about that in another article we wrote about the power of performance, you know, and you were sharing before about the importance of, or in the movie you shared the importance of performance, again, for them to be able to share with the community, maybe for the first time and in their own words and in a socially accepted format, right, in song format, sharing some of the struggles that they're going through and thereby hopefully reducing some of the stigma around PTSD or other mental health problems. So although I have not directly worked with them, I think through the research with Rebecca, just discovering so many wonderful things and feeling very validated in what work that Creative Forces is able to bring to these veterans can do.
Tell the audience about the humming. So there was that moment of actually, it was the music therapist is she here, by the way, the one who's in Westchester? No,
It's
okay,
Julie's not here.
Julie's not here. Okay, just tell us what you told me a few minutes ago before we started, just coincidentally, about the power of humming.
Yeah, not related to the movie, but in my work with chronic pain, we use a lot of voice-based techniques. And one of the things we do with our participants in our studies is, not to teach them, everybody knows how to hum, but to teach them how to use humming purposefully for chronic pain management and for management of, for example, stressors that, of course, exacerbate their experience of chronic pain. And I was telling Renée before this that so many participants in our study say two things. One is, I listen to music 24/7. and I never thought of using music for my pain. So it's like a big aha, like, come on, I've been using this and I didn't know how to use this for my pain. So that is one recurrent message that we're getting. But the other one is, so we do, our studies are all mixed method studies. So we interview participants, talk to participants at the end of the studies. And so a very interesting thing that we keep on hearing is that one of the interventions, music interventions that people like the most and continue to use the most is humming. And Renee asked why. It was, well, humming is very easy. You just hum. It's non-threatening. You don't have to sing. You don't have to open up your mouth. You can do it anywhere. You can do it on the bus. You can do it at home. You can, quickly go to the bathroom if your kids are driving you nuts and driving up your pain, and do some humming in the bathroom. But what people share is that it's quick, it's easy, and within 30 seconds, it will give me a deep sense of peace and calmness that I need, and it helps to ground me. And I think the voice can do that.
Yeah,
it stimulates also deep breathing.
And people
right?
don't want to hear me singing in the next room. That's a little disruptive, but that's a great. Well, you should talk about straw phonation sometime as well. I just coincidentally finished Bessel van der Kolk's "The Body Keeps the Score." Have any of you read it? Yeah, it's. I highly recommend it. I mean, I had no idea, and it's representative of this man's 20 years of work in the field, and it's trauma, PTSD, and all kinds of trauma. And he started by trying to treat veterans. Incredibly powerful book, difficult, very difficult to read in many cases, but I couldn't put it down. Who is your audience for this, and how will you distribute this film? And what's the goal actually for the film?
A great question. Our first and most important audience is everyone here, right? And veterans families, anybody who works with trauma, music therapists. But back to the point made a few minutes earlier, that neither, like Ella said, neither Ella or I are veterans, right? So we approach this film being very upfront about that and owning that experience. And to your point, Renee and Rebecca, there's a lot more awareness about PTSD and a lot more support for veterans. However, at the same time, there's no draft. The military-civilian disconnect, as it's known, is larger than it's ever been, probably. So, and Rebecca and Bill can probably speak to this as well. So
the other big difference is multiple deployments is very much unique to this.
Right. Exactly, yeah. So we came from that lens of wanting to, if we can learn, right, as filmmakers, if we can learn about veterans and learn and humanize them this way, then we realize audiences could and should be able to experience that same level of humanity. But we're looking at this here as a starting point, really. Like we would love to be able to share this film with audiences similar to this. We're looking at festivals, but I think primary audience is really service organizations, institutions, schools. We're building curriculum and healing guides around the film. So we would love to connect with anybody who has any interest in helping us figure out the best use of this. And we are talking about TV distribution, but we're early stages for that.
Great.
As of now. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. And one other thing I want to touch on, but we've got to take a few questions too, is that COVID. So you're making this film in the midst of COVID now, and I remember being here in the spring of 2020, and at just about the time that the masks were about to, so this is the extraordinary Walter Reed Mask Initiative, we're about to start on a tour. And I think the first reception was going to be here at the Kennedy Center. It was going to New York, and that's another incredible project that you may have read about. Again, enabling veterans to express what they couldn't say. That's another huge part of this, is that words fail in this situation, and expression in an artistic manner can really help communication. So questions, a couple of questions. We've got a few more minutes. Yes.
So you talked about art opening up, understanding, and all of that. For me, what it brings to mind is arts-based research. So I'm kind of curious if, like, this film is sort of opening up maybe something like that. Something that was mentioned in one of the earlier sessions with the NIH panel was how there's this gap that needs to be filled, but when it comes to music therapy, it is kind of hard to fill that with quantitative research alone. So I'm kind of
So I could,
Did
something that-
everyone hear the question?
echo it back, how, and tell me if I've heard it right, does some of the themes that were presented in the film brings to mind a gap that was mentioned earlier in the NIH panel about arts-based research. And, we're looking at it from a science-based, how do we see it from that side? It's an interesting thing and rather complicated. As the disclaimers at various points of the film point out, we weren't actually watching art, music therapy. We were watching more of what I would say is sort of a non-clinical, maybe community-based activity that's therapeutic and is grounded in music therapy and involves music therapists and people who have had music therapy. The recent expansion for Creative Forces is we now have a national grant program that is, the likely grantees are arts institutions who would like to think about their role in bringing or advancing health and well-being for military and veteran families around 4 focus areas: social connection, resilience, creative expression to understand yourself and others better and to be understood better, and then successful life transitions. So what we're doing there, and again, Sunil and Patricia are a big part of this, we've set this up from the get-go with OMB-approved surveys that are mostly validated scales and an experimental scale, but really coming at it from the community arts programming side, but then also encouraging them to partner with veteran service organizations so that they have that kind of military cultural competency built in. But also we're encouraging people to involve music therapists or art therapists or dance movement therapists so that we're kind of helping to have these folks meet with each other, but also to really respect and think about what is the power that the arts programmers already possess. And to bring in a little bit of, focusing on health and well-being is something that I think that we have been thinking about and aspiring to for a long time at the National Endowment for the Arts or across the arts sector more broadly. And since I've been involved in the NEA way before we got involved in this, the idea that arts creates empathy or arts, there's those kinds of things that we're familiar with. But when you really get into the health part of it, it gets to be initially very complicated. But we've learned over time that you can think about and respect and try to then measure what is the impact that a community-based approach could bring. And especially if it's grounded in clinical.
It's so important, too, to kind of recognize that those are benefits as well. But the hardcore research, the NIH is at least now funding. So this is the first time. This is a brand new initiative. It's in its 2nd year. That's incredibly important because it validates this type of work and the work that's been done for decades. And part 2 of that is that the NIH is also creating a toolkit for high-level research to kind of give everybody a template and a roadmap for how it's done, because I think in the next decade we're going to see a tremendous improvement in the efficacy and the validation of this type of work. We know it. I'm a musician. I know it. I've known it for my whole career, but science needs to know it. And one room for one more question. Okay, go ahead.
Is there a reason why there's no music in the end credits?
They run out of time, 6.5 years.
Next question, please.
Interesting that you noted that. Okay, that's great. Well, listen, thank you so much for being with us, and we wish this film tremendous success, and
Thank you.
hope a lot of people see it. Robbie.